Hello, I'm George Knight. I'm an MA student at the University of Kent, specialising in medieval Canterbury and medieval pilgrim guides. Here we have William Brewyn's Pilgrim Guide for late medieval pilgrims in the late 15th century who've been travelling from Canterbury to Rome. It was written by a William Brewyn in the 1470s. We really don't know a great deal about him, but I'll be discussing more of that later. Everything inside of the Pilgrim Guide is meant to be practically and spiritually beneficial for the pilgrims who are using it. So within, there's a large collection of materials which they would have found useful for themselves. So firstly, the table of contents tells us that there is a list of the churches, relics and indulgences which have been found in Rome. Following this, there is an excommunication letter from Pope Paul II, who would have used this to basically stop any kind of assault or danger the pilgrims may have been in. Following this, there is the actual pilgrim routes and money exchanges which they would have used along the way, so different coinages which could have been exchanged for English currency for foreign currencies they may have encountered. Following this, there is some information on the different landmarks, monuments in Rome, as well as all the different saint stories. Some of these are largely copied from other works, which I'll touch on later. Following that, there is also a list of the relics that were at Canterbury Cathedral during the anniversary of the translation of Thomas Becket in 1470. And after that, there is a collection of Middle English hymns which could be used by pilgrims anywhere along the way and would have avoided them having to use native liturgy or anything like that. What's incredibly interesting is when we plot all of these spots and different stops, the major stops on the pilgrim route, including the alternative one, avoiding all French territory. So the Via Francigena, which typically travels straight from Canterbury down through France, through northwestern Italy, and then down to Rome. Unlike that, this one completely moves around, going through Belgium, then through Germany, then through what is now Austria, and then into northern Italy and down to Rome instead. And this was likely because when Brewyn was doing this journey in the 1460s to the 1470s, this was just after the 100 Years' War, meaning there would have been incredibly high tensions, which are probably reflected in the change in this route. Following this as well, we can see from the Middle English hymns that the intention was clearly that there was some kind of material which could be used by English pilgrims who would have been using this along the way and that could read this anywhere they went. So instead of having to go somewhere to perhaps a foreign church they wouldn't know or perhaps they wouldn't recognise, they would still have some way along the way to give a devotional practice or some kind of worship that could be used straight from their pilgrim guide. What's surprising is that if this guide was purely practical, it's surprising that it's ordered in the way that it is. The pilgrim routes and the money exchanges, etc., all come after a large section, around 40 folios, all on the churches, relics and indulgences of Rome. Now this raises the question of why? And I think the answer is that Brewyn is clearly trying to not only bring people to Rome, but he is also trying to incentivize people to Rome. He is trying to show through his own experience a proven method and a proven way for people to gain a spiritual benefit as they're going on pilgrimage. Not only is this a way to guide someone a path he's already been, it's an incentive and it's describing how worthy and how good and how amazing things he's got from this journey. In addition, by placing all this practical information amongst a large collection of things which are of spiritual value, like these stories of the monuments of Rome, as well as all the legends of the saints and all these relics, it clearly suggests that they're trying to show that the pilgrim route and the process of pilgrimage in itself is of equal quality, if not more so important than some of these other areas. So not only is going to these places and visiting them of practical benefit for your soul, but the actual journey itself is of practical benefit in an equal manner to all of the other parts of the journey. So with such useful information and with so much given from his own experience, we'd love to know who William Brewyn is. But unfortunately, beyond this manuscript and about one other source I'll discuss, we really don't know anything about him. He refers to himself 3 times in the manuscript, twice as capellanus or chaplain. This is certainly what the 18th century owners believed, as they wrote on the formerly pasted down front leaf that he was a chantry priest of the shrine of St. Thomas Becket. The evidence for this is quite sparse. We really don't know that at all, but it seems likely that he did have a close connection, or at least was a Canterbury monk, as he lists in extensive detail the relics of the cathedral. In addition, he also mentions when he's visiting the city of Ulm on folio 40, he said that you should show your tonsured head. And in this, it's very interesting because he used the accusative singular coronum, which really means the tonsure, suggesting that he's speaking from his own experience rather than your tonsure or the tonsure. He's saying, this is my tonsure, so it's likely that he was a monk. His English origin is also suggested by the script that he largely uses in the manuscript, so predominantly it's an Anglicana script, which was very, very popular in England. judging by its name, Anglicana, but he also has a lot of secretary, a different script which was continentally based, but although was coming into England at this time. So even if this doesn't suggest that he was well travelled, which we know he was, it clearly shows that he was a very highly trained scribe, likely which have come from a monastery like Canterbury. The only other reference we have to William is by Casimir Udin, who, writing the late 17th century in his bibliographical guide of ecclesiastical writers, refers to a Guiliamus Brevinus, who supposedly had written a book on the principal churches of Rome, then held in the Vatican archive. Whether this had all the other pieces of information like we have in this edition, we unfortunately don't know, now that that copy is now lost from the Vatican Library. The interesting thing about the William Brevinus referred to is that he likely is the same William, based upon the fact that he is mentioned as being during the pontificates of Pope Paul II and Pope Sixtus IV, which both match up with the time frame of roughly the 1460s to 1470s, in which William supposedly wrote that he was in Rome, or at least visited Rome. It's surprising to learn, knowing all this about the manuscript, that it has unfortunately been missed by a large majority of scholarship. Often parts of the manuscript are mentioned by people, especially the excommunication by Pope Paul II, but it's usually not anything to do with William Brewyn at all. It's something to do with Pope Paul. And this is kind of surprising considering how much we know is in there. It's only in 2019 that Anthony Bale and Sebastian Sebecki actually took this manuscript and used it for the first time as a primary material in the study of pilgrimage. This is perhaps due to the fact that the only edition and commentary that we had until very recently was that of Woodruff, who did the translation. And he's incredibly critical of Brewyn's work and makes a lot of editorial decisions which are kind of against the spirit of what the manuscript is trying to tell us. So, for example, he omits essentially every single folio, so half of the manuscript from his translation. He largely omitted a lot of this because they were all copied from the Ranulph of Higden's Polychronicon and the Legenda Aurea, or the Golden Legend, which were also popular works circulating at the time and which Canterbury likely had copies of, which Brewyn likely copied. At the same time, though, these areas of the manuscript still have small scribal inscriptions, which would have been useful to know, and it seems like a decision which was kind of taken in somewhat of a bad faith. Also, when talking about some of the sections in which the manuscript gives us more personal insight of something from Brewyn's experience, Woodruff actually goes against the majority of what he says. So, for example, when he talks about the Canterbury relic list, he actually says the document is a meagre document and compares it to Henry of Eastry's 1350 list, which he deems as more extensive and having more relics. Instead of deeming this perhaps really useful piece of information showing the diminishing of Canterbury's prestige and perhaps the fact that they'd sold a great deal of their relics, he instead tries to compare and diminish its value. As a result, this was the only commentary for a very long time, so anyone who would have picked this up and considered it as a useful guide probably would have put it back and would have looked for more popular versions instead. I would argue against Woodruff's criticism that here we have perhaps a one-of-a-kind, maybe the last of a manuscript which gives us a really, really personal insight into the mind of pilgrims in the late 15th century. Not only does it give us information about what they deemed important, but it also shows how they considered arranging the information which would have been useful for them on pilgrimage. Most importantly, it gives us the insight and the eyewitness accounts of a man who lived 550 years ago, and gives us access to the things that he thought was important and an expert view into late medieval pilgrimage.